who is professor of sociology at Princeton University and was formerly for many years at the University of University in Madison, right?
Michigan, in Ann Arbor. I received a PhD from Madison, so right, I got to very often myself.
And we have all been looking at your resume, not only what you sent for publication in the invitation, but a most extraordinary, prolific career covering such a wide variety of topics within general family studies, social demography, many other things, and now stretching out into Chinese science and so on. Obviously, a complete grasp of statistical methods and data analysis, and really covering an extraordinary field. We'll come back to questions about the sort of sociology of the family that you do later. But meanwhile, I think I'd like to invite you just to begin your talk, which has a very broad topic, the Chinese family in transition, and not a subheading as far as I can see. So do please go ahead, and we're very happy to have so many people here listening to you as well. A great privilege to have you with us.
Thank you, Patricia. I need to be allowed to share screen. Who is a host? I'm not a, yeah.
You can try now.
Okay, good.
Yes, there you are. That's wonderful.
Okay. Wrong one. Just a second.
There we are. That seems
okay.
to be
Can
right.
You all see me? Okay.
Yes.
See the slide?
See the slide as well, yes.
Great. I actually have a courtesy appointment with Peking University, where I work with collaborators, Jia Yu in particular, in family studies. We collect quite a bit of data and we analyze data within China. Even though, as Patricia said, I'm a quantitative sociologist and methodologist, I believe in the importance of culture. And I believe in the importance of understanding social contexts before you collect and analyze data. So I will start with a slide on the importance of culture. And after the end of the Cold War, differences in civilizations were considered to be important in global politics, but also civilizations divide different countries and different traditions into different kind of societies. And it's going to be more and more important. So I'm going to start, it's related to today's topic because I think we see the importance of traditional Chinese culture on today's family in China, even though Chinese family has been impacted by global forces such as economic development. So let me begin with the importance of the family in Chinese culture. I think traditionally, the family was extremely important in Chinese culture. That's not unique to Chinese culture, but it is important in Chinese culture nonetheless. Let me just highlight a few. One difference between the family in Chinese tradition and Western tradition was that family was cherished in religion as a folk religion. Ancestors were worshipped, and that was forbidden, of course, in the European Christian culture. And was considered, in my characterization of Chinese tradition, in Imperial China, I consider the family as one of the three main pillars along with Confucianism as ideology and state bureaucracy as form of government. And those three things make China quite different from Western tradition, European tradition. As we all know, the state, Chinese state, had a lot of power and capacity. But even before the Communist Revolution that culminated in the People's Republic of China in 1949, the state actually did not have much power capacity below the county government level. So below the county level government, Chinese by their local elites, mainly family elites. So family performed a main social institution that regulated civil affairs among ordinary people. One example was social norms regarding sexuality was all controlled by the family. I'll give you another example. This was taken in Taiwan. You don't see that phrase in mainland China, but it reflects the importance of Chinese family. It says, if you're not filial to parents, it is useless to pray to God. So in this phrase, this is carved in stone. In Chinese traditional culture, the family or parents were elevated to the importance, the same level as God. Of course, this will be considered heresy in Western tradition and disallowed, definitely disallowed. One of the things we observe, we know from our studies on Chinese family is that this type of traditional family has been eroded in contemporary China. So that vision that family is as important as religion and parents were as important as gods are no longer applicable in today's China. But this is not unique to China. The family has undergone a transition globally in what is called the second demographic transition. So I'm going to talk a lot about second demographic transition. I'm going to ask whether the second demographic transition has taken place in China and in what form. Before I discuss the second demographic transition, let me review for you what is the first demographic transition. The first demographic transition is a transition from a high mortality, high fertility regime to a low fertility, low mortality regime. And usually what happens as a result of industrialization, fertility decline came first to be followed by another decline in fertility because you no longer need to have so many children in order to have enough surviving number of children. So in China, you see the first demographic transition. So life expectancy, this is at the founding of People's Republic, was relatively low on average. They only lived 40-some years. And that increased to today's of mid-70s, approaching 80s, but not 80s yet. So you have a gradual improvement in life expectancy. That's an indication of decline of mortality that happened rapidly after 60s. And then you have a decline in fertility that followed the decline in mortality. And that most rapid change occurred also in late 60s and 70s. Today, we often attribute that decline in fertility to government family planning efforts, and especially well-known one-child policy. But the fact is that even without family planning, one-child policy, fertility in China would have declined anyway. Fertility would have declined anyway. And give you I will give you another chart about decline in fertility later. So what is the second demographic transition? The second demographic transition is the result of further modernization or economic development after the completion of the first demographic transition. And this time, the driving force behind the second demographic transition is individual freedom. And as this is like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as people in life got better, as their education improved, they begin to seek more individual freedom. And one of the things they would like to be freed from is a constraint of the family. So family has been a victim of the second demographic transition because individuals wanted their more freedom, for example, freedom of mate choice and their sexual freedom. So the main institution being affected is the family in the second demographic transition. We will discuss some main indicators of the second demographic transition. I'm going to actually focus on 4 of them. Let's take a look at fertility and mortality trends in China after the People's Republic. So in the 50s, you see this is the age pyramid. You can see a lot of young people and very few elderly. And that if you move fast forward rapidly to today's China, we don't have the census 2020 yet, but we know demographics. Demographics, you cannot be old unless you've been young once. So if you're 10 years old, you're going to be 20 in 10 years. If you're 50, you're going to be 60 if you still live 10 years from now. So demographic profiles can be projected from past data very reliably. As you can see, China has changed from a young population in the 50s and 60s now to a flat kind of age distribution. Now, actually, at a young age, you see the shrinkage of young people, and we can expect China to be old because those who were born in the 60s will be near retirement and will be old pretty soon. So China is affected by demographic forces and is becoming an aging society. Let me discuss main indicators of the second demographic transition. We expect low fertility, especially below replacement level. By below replacement level, I mean on average, a woman will have fewer than 2 children because it takes a woman to have 2 children on average for the population to be reproducing itself. So replacement level fertility is 2 on average for every woman. We also have late age of marriage because people would like to pursue their individual interests, career interests, and other interests. And they may have different partners in the US, for example. So you have late age of marriage, dating culture, and so on. And in that dating culture, in the second demographic transition, and premarital sex is expected because they may wait until their 30s to be married, but sexuality starts relatively early, much earlier than the age of marriage. So there is a gap between when they start sexuality, become sexually active, and the age they get married. And so you have a premarital sex. You also have non-marital cohabitation. I'm going to give you data on non-marital cohabitation. It's an intimate relationship in a co-residing relationship. So a young man and woman will live together without marriage, but practically speaking, they form a union, they live together. They share the same household, and then sometimes they may share economic resources. We assume they also have sex. As a part of second demographic transition, we also expect the increase of divorce. Once people are unhappy with their partner, they will divorce and change a partner, and sometimes they will not remarry, sometimes they remarry. So marriage is no longer for life because people may get disillusioned with their current partner and with marriage, and they will get divorced. And we see that in the West, and we also see that in China. Last indicator, very important indicator, that it is clearly true in many Western societies, the US, Latin America, and also in Europe, is a large number, in fact, a very large fraction of children who are born to unmarried mothers. So you have children born out of wedlock in many Western societies. We do not see that in China. We do not see that phenomena indeed in most East Asian societies. I'm going to talk about children born to unmarried mothers as well. And also children raised by divorced single parents, we also see that very little of that. Okay, so let me move on to our quantitative studies of those indicators. I'm going to focus on 4 such outcomes. Before I do that, let me review a few main broad trends in China. Those 2 such broad trends have a huge impact on demographic transition, either the first or the second. One such a big trend is a very quick and fast increase in educational attainment. The second trend I'm going to show in this slide is a narrowing gender gap in education over time. First, the broad trend of increase in educational attainment. Let's look at men on the left. The dark color gives you the proportion of Chinese in the particular cohort who were illiterate. So illiteracy was a majority before the People's Republic. As Chinese society improved, illiteracy went down to almost 0 for most recent cohort. And in its replacement, you have educational attainment. This is elementary school. This is a junior high. This is senior high, and this is college. And indeed, you have now a larger percentage of Chinese with even graduate education. So you have a massive improvement in education attainment over time in China. That's the first thing. And that drives freedom because people with education have high expectations for themselves in terms of career as well as in their mate choice. They want better lives. They want to have freedom. The second thing that happened in China after People's Republic is gender equality. So for earlier cohorts, you can observe huge disparity in educational attainment. So here, for example, illiteracy among Chinese men was about 70 to 75% for men. For women, it's 95%. So you have a huge disparity in education attainment in earlier cohorts. But that disparity, gender disparity, disappeared gradually over time. So for the most current cohort, men and women have achieved parity in educational attainment. With few exceptions, I'm not going to talk about. With few exceptions in rural China, you still have gender disparity. So as I said, fertility decline was an important social trend, and that trend was not just the government's family planning efforts. Indeed, our research indicates even China gets rid of all family planning policies. They did relax one-child policy a few years ago, but they still have some restrictions. But even without family planning policy, we think fertility in China will still be low. Actually, one of the concerns I have about China's future is its continued decline in fertility. How do we know that? One way we know that is we ask intention, our surveys, how many children would you like to have ideally if government doesn't restrict your fertility behavior? If there is no policy restriction, what's the number of children you would like to have ideally? So this is called fertility intention. So this is between 2010 to the current. We actually have survey undergoing right now in 2020. You can see the ideal number of children is always below 2. So this is ideal. And ideas, as we know, are not always realized. So realized fertility should be lower than that because you would like to have children. As I said, childbirth always, I will review that, I will tell you that, is always within family. So if they don't find a suitable mate, if they don't get married, or for health reasons, for economic reasons, they may not realize the fertility. So realized fertility surely is below the number of children desired. Okay, now I'm going to go over 4 topics. One is delayed age of marriage and increasing singlehood. For many, many decades after People's Republic of China, marriage was universal. That means everyone sooner or later will get married. And you can see that from what is called Kaplan-Meier survival curves. This is the age on the x-axis. This is an urban male, this is an urban female, from the left to right. So across different cohorts, you see a delay in marriage. That is, they will get married later. But for earlier cohorts, clearly, by age 35, 40, everybody will be married because the proportion who is unmarried is almost 0. You start from nobody's married to 100% married later age. And that was true for earlier birth cohorts. But we now see the emergence of some proportion who will not be married in their 30s, and some may not be married for life in their 50s and so on. And that is emergent. We think the proportion of being single will increase over time in the future. And from this study. And you can see more directly, this is the median age of marriage for earlier cohorts, and they will be married around the beginning of People's Republic. For women, it's a low 20, both men and women, it was in their low 20s. This is 21, 23. By now, it's in late 20s, it's reaching 25, 26, and it goes up, keeps going up. So the age of marriage for the first marriage has gone up over time. I'm not going to spend time discussing the decline. It has to do with government policy of getting permission to get married. In China, anything you do requires permission. Even getting married, having a child, requires government approval, and there's some change in government policy. But the overall trend has been an increase in age of marriage. Now, let me give you one message from this talk. Marriage used to be universal. Universal means everybody will be married. regardless of socioeconomic status. SES stands for socioeconomic status. But it's no longer true. Marriage has been changed towards, from being universal, towards being based on socioeconomic status. That is, it becomes more and more selective. You need to have adequate economic resources before you can be married in China. It used to be for everyone, the poor, the rich, everybody would be married. But now it is more selective. You need to have enough money, economic resources to be married. We find this change or transition. So as I said, marriage was universal after the People's Republic in 49. It has now become to be based on socioeconomic status. That's a trend. And let's also look at Kaplan-Meier curves now broken down by education cohort. Before, those different lines are for different groups with different levels of education attainment. In the end, there is a difference by time of marriage, but there is no difference by the end. Everybody will be married. Doesn't matter what your education attainment is, you will be married after 35 or so. That was true for male and female. And look at most recent cohort. For people, this is for men. For men with the least amount of education, this is the primary school and below, they no longer get married. And that was not true before because everybody got married earlier cohorts. But for most recent cohort, if you are leastly educated men, you no longer get married. And that's not because they don't want to be married. It is because they couldn't find a woman who will marry them. So it is more differentiated by education in most recent cohort. For women, the reverse is true. You also have a proportion who will not be married, but this is the marriage is most pronounced for the most highly educated women. That is, those with graduate education, with PhDs and masters. And the reason is a cultural expectation of hypergamy. That is, women are supposed to marry men of high socioeconomic status, and it is hard for highly educated women to be matched to husbands of adequate economic and social status, economic resources and socioeconomic status. So highly educated women and lowly educated men have difficulties finding their marriage partners or get married. One of the problems in China is a rapid increase in housing price. And the housing price varies by city. And we know that the two, age of marriage and housing costs are associated, are positively associated. The more expensive housing, the housing cost, the later the marriage age. And I'm not going to spend more time on that. This is for men, this is for women. You see positive association between housing cost and age of marriage. Another social change we observed in our CAPS data, by the way, CAPS data is a family household longitudinal survey. I've been working with colleagues at Peking University. We've been collecting the data since 2010, and anyone can request the data. It's made publicly available to all researchers worldwide. So if you are interested in analyzing family behaviors in China, you can request the data and analyze the data yourself. We made the data publicly available. So for early cohorts, they did not have their own house. This is timing of purchasing or building their house. From early cohorts, that was after their marriage. They get married and worry about housing. And marriage usually occurred within their parents' home. But now they desire a nuclear family, their own independent living, but also they would like to have their own units. So now more and more common, a married couple will have their own housing units, either built or purchased before they get married. So you have a huge social change in the timing of having their own housing units. And for earlier cohorts, having your own housing unit occurred after marriage. For most recent cohorts, it is before their marriage. Okay, I know time is limited. Let me move on to this, hypergamy, age hypergamy. This is the age homogamy. That is, within 4 years, 3 years actually, husband is a little bit older than the wife within 3 years. And the homogamy, age homogamy increased dramatically to 70% to the earlier phase of economic reform. We see a reversal of that. That is, people are no longer married within 3 years window. What does it mean? It means now it is becoming more and more common for women to marry older men. Why older men? Because older men have more economic resources. It takes time to accumulate money. And it's because of economic pressure, women in China are becoming less likely to marry men of their own age. They're becoming more likely to marry men of who are older and thus have more economic resources. Okay, I have a lot of data to show you. I don't know if I have time. We all, in our survey, we asked, what kind of partner would you like to have? Economic resources, housing, hukou, education, and appearance, physical attractiveness. And physical attractiveness is always important for Chinese when they look for a marriage partner. But we see also importance of income and housing. The gender differences is most pronounced. Women respondents will tell us income is important. And men will tell us physical attractiveness is important from our survey. So you see a continuation of gender stereotype in mate selection. For women, money is important. For men, appearance is important. Let me move on quickly to the second topic for the day. Increase in cohabitation. Premarital cohabitation was absent before economic reform. It is now more accepted. This is from census data. We see a surge in young men, women living together without marriage. This is a contemporaneous, that is, we observe in census time, still below 2% of Chinese live with their partners without being married to them. But if we look retrospectively, for those who are married, we ask them, have you ever cohabited before you marry? The percentage is much higher, reaching 30%. That is, about 30% of Chinese will live together without marriage, then move on to marriage. So premarital cohabitation is widely practiced and accepted. And again, you see a huge increase by birth cohort. You also see regional variation along the coast in more developed areas in Beijing, Zhejiang, Shanghai, and so on. You see a high proportion of premarital cohabitation than in inland. There are three interpretations of cohabitation. One is that cohabitation is a precursor to marriage. Second is cohabitation is alternative to being single. third cohabitation is alternative to marriage. In China, for the most couples, it is a first. That is, cohabitation is a precursor to marriage. They're not married, they choose cohabitation because they're not ready. They don't have enough money. They don't have a housing unit. So they need time to accumulate more economic resources before they get married. So for most Chinese, premarital cohabitation is a precursor to marriage rather than is an alternative to being single. That is, they pretend to be in that relationship for a long time, or alternative to married. Average duration of premarital cohabitation is less than a year, it's about 10 months. They just wait to be married. The consequences of this, I'm not going to talk much about it, is that it delays cohabitation, delays the age of marriage, and also you also see cohabitation associated with premarital fertility conception. That is, they may conceive a child during cohabitation and then get married after a child is conceived. And that's why we know for sure there is sex, because they may even have unprotected sex. They will get conceived in cohabitation and then get married, because we know the timing in our data. We know their timing of marriage. We know the timing of their childbirth. Second, let me move on to divorce. In popular media, the increase in divorce is widely reported. You see a sharp increase in divorce. This is by indication of what's called a crude divorce rate. And crude divorce rate in China is very high, has increased a lot. But this is misleading because this measure is based on population size, 1,000 people, rather than actual marriage based on marriage duration. So in order to understand divorce, we need to look at divorce based on duration of marriage. So the crude divorce rate, number of divorces per 1,000 people, is misleading. And let me get to the conclusion. The conclusion is that divorce has increased in China, no doubt, but divorce by our definition of duration per duration period, it is still much lower than in Japan and much lower than the US. If you look at 10 years after marriage, divorce rate is very small in China in comparison to the same rates in US and Japan. So in some ways, divorce has been exaggerated in media because they focused on crude divorce rate instead of duration specific divorce rate. Finally, let me move on fertility out of marriage. A main message of this section is twofold. One is that almost every married woman will have at least one child. So Chinese, you have universal childbirth within marriage. Second is that there are almost no childbirth outside marriage. So let me give you data that support the two conclusions. This is the proportion of ever give birth to a child before marriage. Before marriage means they actually would get married after they give a child to a birth. This varies from earlier cohorts of 4% to 6%. This is very low, but those women will be married soon afterwards. If you look at proportion of women who give birth to a child and remain unmarried by the time of the survey, they still get married later, is much lower. It's below 1% for most cohorts before. It's around 1% for most recent cohort. But again, they could be married after our survey. So women who give a child before marriage and stay unmarried is almost zero. Very few. Very few. Then look at the other side, proportion of women who would not give birth to a child at all by age. As you can see, for the last age group, 45 to 49, the proportion of women who are married but would not have a child is almost zero. It's below, it's around 1% or below 1% throughout the years. That is, you have universal childbirth among married women. Once they're married, they give birth to at least one child. If they don't get married, they don't have a child. So you have a strong association between marriage and childbirth. So let me move on to my conclusions. Family changes in China have unique characteristics. You have individualized family behaviors. You have more differentiation now than before based on individuals' own choices. You see dramatic social changes in marriage and cohabitation behaviors. I've shown that. You have delayed marriage, you have increase in cohabitation, and so on. But still, and you have more divorce, but still, child is still of ultimate importance in Chinese family system and remains to be important. So you don't see extremely low extramarital, premarital childbirth, and you don't see childlessness among married women. So child has remained to be important. You don't give a birth to a child if you don't get married. Once you're married, you at least have one child. In other work, we also study the importance of education to children among Chinese families. That also remains very important. Not only they give birth to at least one child, they also invest enormously in educational outcomes of their children. And that is also important. And the increase in divorce is limited, at least lower than what has been reported in mass media. We see similarities and differences in comparison to other East Asia and Southern European societies. Especially China is very similar to Korea, South Korea, and in some ways also similar to Japan. We have a table that summarizes differences between China and other countries, US, Japan, South Korea, Italy, and Spain. And in terms of mean age of marriage, China is still a little bit earlier, but is increasing. Other countries you see much later of age of marriage. Cohabitation, China is increased, and divorce rate, China is increased, but not as high as in other countries. So let me conclude. There are indications that the second demographic transition has occurred in China. Second, premarital cohabitation is now widely practiced and accepted in China, especially among the educated and rural to urban migrants. I did not have time to discuss this finding, but you can read our work, published work. However, this is the cultural part. there are culture-specific continuities. I mentioned few, such as absence of non-marital birth, that's still continuation from the past, a universal desire for marriage that is also a continuation from the past, and also hypergamy, that is, women would like to be married to men of more or equal economic resources. That is still a cultural norm. Marriage has become more associated with social status and more difficult to realize over time, especially for low status men. That's a social change. Finally, if I would like to characterize today's Chinese family, I would say Chinese family today is child-centered, and that is a continuation from the past. It's one strong characteristic of Chinese family that has persisted and now is persisting in today's China. This concludes my talk. Thank you very much for your time. Okay, I just finished on time, I think, 45 minutes.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much, Professor Xie. That was very comprehensive and for many of us, very, very interesting in details. May I call on the anyone on the audience like to put their hands up? Yes, Dr. Rakesh Kumar.
Thanks, Professor Yixue, for this wonderful lecture. And you talked about. I think it's the lecture all revolves more around the post that is economic reform and opening up phase. We are talking about the economic development brings so many changes. The divorce rate and whatever. And so in the beginning of the lecture, in the starting first slide, you talked about the family in traditional China used to work as, it's a politics and bureaucratic, after this institutions like that. But what I found, because I'm working on Chinese youth political participation values and other things in post-Mao era. So what I found that the role of family is or was overtaken by the party. So basically the values or whatever the family used to teach, it has moved on to the party, and party who is now it's trying to impart the values of the things. So my question is, where do you locate family in this present context? Yeah, this is my question. Thank you.
Very, very good question.
Yeah.
So it is true that family had an important function in traditional Chinese society and in today's China. It serves as a mediator, mediating the state, the government, and the individual's lives. So in traditional China, when the government wanted to keep peace, stability, they will control families, and through families control individual behaviors. So hukou system, for example, you're tied down to your place of residence. That's how the government controls individuals through family. That practice has continued in today's China. In some ways, today's China, government has a stronger role in controlling family than before, because with modern state economy, the government has more capacity. As I said, if for a long time getting married required the government permission, and for a long time giving birth to a child requires government permission, and even today you need a government permission in hukou, for example. One of the reasons why it is almost nobody, we don't observe childbirth out of marriage, is because you would not get household registration hukou if you are not married. It's very hard to get official registration, get a birth certificate, and all documents if you are not properly married. So government has a lot of power government controls family level behavior. That's one aspect. In some ways, the government has strengthened its control of family and family related behaviors. That's true. But on the other hand, another force pushes in a different direction. That is, with more economic resources, with better education, individuals seek more freedom. They would like to have their own private lives. You see that in many aspects. For example, you see an increase in nuclear families. They don't like to live in extended families. They would not want to live with their in-laws. Even parents do not like to live with their adult married children. They would like to live independent lives. So you see that desire of more independent living. You also see more premarital cohabitation. And also from other studies, I'm not studying that yet, you also see non-marital sex that's more practiced by Chinese youth. And also you see more divorces. So those are indications that individuals would like to exercise their freedom, would like to make their own choices in their private spheres. And the government also accepts that, recognize that. So you have two forces. On the one hand, government would like to control individuals through family because they would like to have political stability. But on the other hand, the individuals now seek and exercise more and more their freedom. They realize the individuals' needs. Marriage is not just for the family, marriage is for their own well-being. As in India, in the earlier periods, most marriages are arranged by parents, but now almost all marriages are based on individuals' choices. You can call it love-based choices by individuals rather than parents. So you can see the need for individual freedom and choices in their private lives. And government also recognized that. And for example, premarital cohabitation was illegal for long periods in China. It's no longer considered illegal. So government tolerates such practices because they reflect kind of more modern values and practices.
Right.
And with a one-child policy, they abolished the one-child policy in response to low fertility rates. So the government, I expect the government to give individuals more freedom in family and family-related behaviors, as long as those behaviors do not pose a threat to political stability. I expect that the trend is moving towards more individual choice in the next few decades, rather than more government control.
Okay, I've seen many people have posted questions to the chat box and also put up their hand. Can I call on Saurabh Kumar to either repeat the question in the chat box or some other one which you had in mind?
Thank you very much, Chair, Professor Oberoi, and thank you very much, Professor CA. Most interesting presentation, a real presentation, if I may say so. Pleasure to listen, to learn. I have several questions, but I will resist because others are there. So one is the structure aspect, so those, but the other, I better come to that in the interest of time. Comparing with India, could you comment on the relative role of the in-laws family vis-a-vis the family of the children, both male and female? Is there a change over traditional values? Thank you.
Oh, you're asking about in-laws, right? Relationship with in-law.
The relationship, the importance of the in-laws for the couple,
yes,
both ways.
Yeah, yes.
Male, the female.
Yes.
If you have an idea of things in India, I have a comparison. Where virtually we say, or it is believed, that you don't just marry an individual, you actually the two families marry each other. To that point, used to be and not so on. So I just want to understand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, again, we see continuities and changes from past practices. One continuity we observe clearly is that in terms of family relations, extended families are very important. And in terms of grandchildren, both the care of grandchildren, young children, and the education of grandchildren, grandparents are heavily involved from both sides, from both maternal and paternal. They are heavily involved in grandchildren. So multi-generational relationships remain very strong. This is again related to the child-centeredness of Chinese family. That has continued. But in terms of other practices, you see changes. You have a move away, gradual move away from multi-generational co-residence, permanent co-residence. Sometimes in-laws will come to live with them to take care of grandchildren, but they don't stay with them forever. So in terms of residential family type, it's becoming more and more nuclear family, just a husband, wife, and children without in-laws, without their adult grandparents. And so that's one residential form. Another change is that in mainland China, because of equality between men and women, because the change in the gender relations, you do see when grandparents are involved, when they live with grandparents, there is a change to live with mother's parents. There's more incidences or practices of co-residing with mother's parents rather than father's parents. That's not true in traditional Chinese family. That's not true in today's Taiwan, for example. If there's co-residence, it's in Taiwan, China, usually it is with father's side rather than mother's side. But in China, you do see more instances of living with mother's side. And actually living with mother's side, the mother does not suffer from economic penalty. Actually, her mother will do quite a bit of housework so that the mother can be more actively engaged in labor force. So there's a benefit for a couple to live with a mother's side in-laws rather than father's in-laws, or wife's in-laws rather than husband's in-laws. So you see continuity and change in terms of relationship. Also, grandparents are heavily involved in decision-making as well for the family. I have a former PhD student, Chen Chen. Her work is around the importance of grandparents for family behaviors or practices in the couple. So they are involved in a lot of decisions. In-laws are involved in lots of decisions, especially they provide economic resources. So the relationship is complicated, but in-laws are relevant, but gender relationship has changed.
Right. I saw in the first person to jump into the chat box was Bina Agarwal. Bina, are you still in the meeting? Yeah, I think she's gone. I hope we'll be.
No, I'm here.
Come on.
Yeah. I was trying to unmute myself. Thank you. Thank you, Professor, for a very interesting lecture. I have a lot of Chinese students. I teach masters in the UK, and this is another additional topic for them to do their dissertations. So thank you. I have two quick questions. The first question was that you mentioned that fertility would have declined in any case without the one-child family. And now I wanted to ask further that, when you have such a big campaign, a state-driven campaign over a very long period, then it surely changes people's preferences, their expectations, and social norms. So one would expect that this has an indirect effect on the kinds of preferences that you talked about when you survey women today, even though there could be other factors like education which matter. The second question is that I noticed that when there was a big jump in the figures of people buying houses before marriage between 1990 and 1999. It's a whole decade. And I was wondering whether that is also to do with a change in law, or what are the factors underlying it. And I have a particular interest to know whether in terms of ownership of housing, you have gender disaggregated data, which could say what proportion of the house is owned by women and men. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Those are important questions. It is true that there is a feedback effect on intentions. So practices will reinforce beliefs about what's an ideal number of children. I think there is an indirect effect of policy, one-child policy or family planning policy from the past, but still, I think the sources of those ideational changes could be many, one of which could be government policy. But still, we also know there are practical issues facing couples when they have children. One is the educational cost. Chinese parents invest enormously on educational outcomes of their children. And housing cost is very expensive. And they have, in big cities, they have limited the living space. So those practical economic pressures pushes people to have fewer number of children. They would not want to have their children to be disadvantaged. We ask them, what will make you to have more children? Many will say, if I have more money, I will have more children. So economic pressure at an individual level, at a couple level, seems to be an important factor in affecting number of children they would like to have. So I will not exclude indirect effect of policy on fertility intention, but still once it has an effect, it becomes ideational. The fact is still true. Most Chinese people would want to have small number of children. That's unlikely to change, even if the government changes its policy. The government now changes its policy to promote fertility. I see that coming pretty soon, but I don't think people will change necessarily to their fertility behaviors in response to changes in government policy. I think it's too late, and the policy will have limited effect. The other is change of law. I think there is it's not just change of law, divorce law, that affected the timing of acquiring their housing units. Because as you look at the figure is broken down by decades, and the change is gradual. As you alerted already, the housing contribution of the housing mostly comes from a husband's side. This is one of the traditions that has not changed. My colleagues, other colleagues, economic colleagues have studied savings behaviors and other behaviors, entrepreneurship, and they're more higher. Those saving rates and entrepreneurship are higher among Chinese men who have sons than daughters, because those with sons under economic pressure to have more money, because they have an obligation of providing economic resources for their sons to get married. That is contributions toward the housing, so that the son can get married. So the expectation, the burden, economic burden, is more on the male side, even though you see parity, gender parity in educational attainment. and that is a little bit traditional kind of legacy at work. So it's gendered. Housing expectation is gendered, even though women do contribute, and women's wives' family does contribute.
Okay, Usha Chandan, I saw you had a very interesting question there about the leftover women. Would you like to put it to the group?
Yes, the other answer is about inheritance. Inheritance law is right now official law is equal division between daughters. All children have the equal rights, but parents in practice will contribute more towards the son's housing than daughter's housing. So the practice deviates from official inheritance laws. There is a change in property division as a result of divorce that favors those who contribute to the acquisition of the housing, because acquisition of a house initial before marriage was mostly contributed by husband's side and wife's side. So the change of law is in some ways became unfavorable for women, because the housing value is tilted towards those who contributed to housing before marriage, that is the husband's side. Okay, the leftover children.
Well, maybe Usha would like to ask it herself. Sure. Unmute yourself, Usha. You can't do so.
I have.
Yeah, there we are.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor, for this very, very comprehensive, along with so much data. It's very useful for us, those who are looking at time, family in transition, especially the society. So my question is basically not just about leftover women, the role of government, the role of family as a mediator for the governing body to actually, maintain the social order as you had mentioned, the traditional role of family. Do you think it has changed? Somehow when I look at it, I think it's just getting reiterated, especially I'm taking the example of leftover women, how the government actually created this term and also created the stigma around the whole term of leftover women. And so that the highly educated women, as you had mentioned, are not marrying, so that they fall into the necessity of getting married, the need for every woman to necessarily get married. Thank you.
The leftover women usually are highly educated, but the absolute number is still small. So the government at an official level has not been too concerned with leftover women as a social issue, because those are usually highly educated. And as I said, the trend is toward individualized family behavior. So the government tolerates the social change of individualized family behavior. For example, the government has been more lenient towards homosexuality, even though it doesn't recognize gay marriages, but still it's no longer using legal means to punish gay marriage or homosexuality. So it's a small proportion, doesn't pose a threat. And some, actually, most of them are still would like to be married, but they just don't find the right mates, so marriage partners. So government considers those as personal choices, and when I don't see the government being active in that area. But who is very active is usually women's parents are very, very active. And they will work very hard for their daughters to get married. if you go to public places in Shanghai and Beijing, you see hundreds, there are markets, hundreds of marriage markets. And who will go to these markets? Their parents. Their parents will bring CV, photos, and will want to find marriage partners for their daughters. So it's something being worked on, not by the government, but by women's parents when women reach a certain age. And again, I think the government is probably doing a good job not intervening with individuals' lives for such a small and relatively highly educated group. Does that answer the question, or I had a different question?
We could I could add to that, Professor Xie, by asking you, elsewhere in East Asia, there is a lot of talk about what they call parasite singles. Mm-hmm. That is, people who delay marriage, men and women, to stay at home, have the comforts of home and family, earn good money, and have good fun. Is that something that you, is that a cause for interest there?
Yes. We also study this group. We haven't finished a paper yet. Several things in that aspect. One is that parasite situation, not just for unmarried, even someone married will stay with their parents. They're likely to be sons rather than daughters. So unsuccessful sons are likely to stay with parents and live off parents' economic resources, given the tradition of linear relationship. So sons are more likely to do that after marriage than daughters. The second interesting thing about the phenomena is that we see a lot of young adults between age 20 to 30. They will take a long break between completion of education, either from high school or junior college and college, and then work independent life. We call transition to adulthood, have their own work, have their own housing unit. Many of them actually don't work. They just take a long break and live off their parents' economic resources. Mm-hmm. And some of them take courses, online courses, training programs, but they are in limbo between formal education and independent life. So those two I would mention is that one is gendered on the male side, the other is actually they don't work, not just to live, but also some of them live, but also a large proportion of them don't have permanent and regular jobs.
So let me see. Who would like to come in now? There's a question from Pankaj Yadav. Are you still there? He had asked, yes, good. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to know from the professor about the policies, regarding the maternity paternity leave, and also, how do the young couples take care of their children when both of them are working, and especially when the grandparents are not around to take care.
It's an issue. So before economic reform, there was more welfare for child's well-being provided by Danwei in urban China, not rural China. The government never provided much childcare in rural China. And in before economic reform, everybody worked for government state-owned enterprises one way or another. And Danwei, the work unit, very often provided the childcare centers so that women could both work and raise children, or provided the care at their work unit. But now it's no longer true. work units are not obligated to provide childcare facilities, and many very often the commuting distance is quite long because of before their residence and work unit distance is very short, so it's no longer true. And so now again, I emphasize the word individualized family behavior. Child care has become more individualized. It's a combination. First of all, fathers are quite involved in China. That's not well known, but fathers are quite involved. Not every father, but many fathers are involved. They have grandparents on two sides, both maternal side and paternal side. Grandparents are involved. You also have hired labor. You could have living nannies or hourly nannies. Also, you have childcare centers, commercial ones. So a variety of means are used for childcare, but that's one main issue. Childcare is more difficult, and also government is considering there is a maternity leave when the child is born. So we still haven't seen much change in wives' labor force participation yet. So as you know, in Japan and Korea, many mothers will become full-time mothers when they have children. That has happened to a small number of mothers whose husbands make a good money, but a very small proportion. In part because for most families, the husband is not sufficiently economically well off for them to do that. In some ways, women will also not want to give up their careers. So Chinese women do very well economically. They do just as well, sometimes surpass men in educational attainment. So they consider a huge loss or disadvantage if they give up their full-time job for their own careers. So Chinese women, many highly educated professional women, would not want to take a long-term leave to be full-time mothers. So again, combination is used, and that also explains why fertility is low, because they are not full-time mothers, and childcare is difficult and expensive.
We have a question here from a Vietnamese participant, a very interesting one about something called Liang To Hun. Can the participant come in and pose his question, please? That is in the chat room. Thank you for the presentation. I have a small question for you. Recently, Liang To Hun is becoming very popular in the Jiangzhou area. What do you think about this model? And do you think it can become a good model for the new generation in China? Actually, I have no idea what Liang To Hun is, but perhaps you can enlighten us.
Yeah, is a person here?
It doesn't seem to be. It has not come in now, as yet. It is a question in the chat box.
This is related to what I said. Social change have taken place. So you see emergence of women's status surpassing men's, and or at least being the same as men's. So gender relations has changed in China. So in the past, a wife will be married into the household of the husband and will be cut off from her family of origin.
Okay.
So a lot of the gender disadvantage came from the fact it's a patrilineal system. So husband, once is a permanent member of his family, the wife is a member of his family, will be cut off, is no longer a permanent member of her family. So I think what Liang Donghuan is moving towards gender equality. So on both sides, you remain a strong relationship. And so it's no longer male-sided.
Right. Well, thank you for that explanation. I'd not heard the phrase used before. Would anyone else who would like to come in at this point? Saurabh Kumar, you would like to?
Right.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Professor Ye. You mentioned status, socioeconomic status, and in a number of different contexts. One was low status men unlikely to find partners. Could you please elaborate what constitutes status, socioeconomic status? Of course, income, of course, education. But beyond that, I'm specifically interested in knowing the contribution of the family's socioeconomic status to the individual's socioeconomic status, the income level of the family, the education of the family, and also specifically membership of the party. Does that contribute to socioeconomic status, and in what way? Thank you.
Yes, all the above. We do see one's own education is probably the most important indicator of social status. If we look at educational sort of the mating, over time, the trend has been increasing. So men, husband and wife are becoming more similar in their own education attained. So that is a social change. So education is important, but also family origin, socioeconomic status is also important. It's called a matching doors. So if you marry someone, you should marry someone of equal socioeconomic status in family origin, including rural-urban 户口, including political origin. So it's a multi-dimensional concept, and people try to balance different things. Sometimes there is exchange, social exchange. So if you this is still area of research, so we're still working on that. For example, we believe, we're studying whether family origin disadvantage could be compensated with your own educational achievement. So you could have a low status, but your family origin is high. That could compensate for your lack of resources, social status on individual's part by family resources, money, for example. So it's a multi-dimensional, and one dimension could be used to compensate for another dimension. They can borrow. It's a composite. It's a weighted sum. So when they introduce each other in kind of matching, a lot of the marriages, actually, I didn't have a chance to talk about how marriage is achieved, partners. They no longer practice family arranged marriage. So individuals make their own choices. Parents play a big role in introducing children to their potential partners. So it's introduced. The predominant mode of marriage is through introduction. And parents can introduce through their friends and social networks, potential marriage partners to their adult children. And they also sometimes approve or disapprove certain choices in discussions of introduction, in decisions of approval, disapproval, one's status and one's family status are being taken into account. So those status, all of the above play a role, and parents will be involved.
Right. I think there's...
Does Dr. Kumar has a follow-up?
Yes, go ahead, quickly.
Thank you very much. Second part of the question was, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you. So, second part of my question was the role of membership of the party in contributing to
Okay, okay.
status.
It's complicated. Usually, membership in another party is associated with economic resources. Again, this is a new area, so we have observed that if one is a politically active, is a party member, the person is less likely to cohabit because cohabitation may be associated with kind of free lifestyle. So there is an effect of political affiliation with the party with a low instances of cohabitation. But in general, party membership of parents is considered a positive attribute, a part of economic resources.
Right. Okay, now a very touching message here from our participant from Vietnam. I begin to think that participant is a woman who says, I'm sorry, but I can't talk now because I have my baby boy beside me. So I think that is a bit of a comment on the role of parents not entirely free to act as they might. Now, I think we have, there is one question waiting from Aprajita Sarkar. Would you like to come in with raised
Yeah.
hand? Not written.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the like really good illustration of data. Firstly, I'm going to tweak the questions that I had in the chat box because you've answered many of them. Number one, with what is the most popular form of contraception? And I'm asking this with the attention on whether it is male-centric condoms or women have their own IUDs, or is it abortions? This is especially pertinent for premarital couplings. And the other is there a pattern of migration towards urban centers which is supporting nuclear families, or is it a occurrence where like it's across urban and rural divide? Thanks.
Okay.
I'll answer the second question I didn't get. The first question I got, the method of contraception. What's the second question?
The question is, hello? Yeah, okay.
Yes,
the question
I hear
is
you.
about whether urban families are nuclear households. Like,
Yes.
is there a link between migrating to cities and
Mhm.
choosing to live alone with your wife or husband or partner?
Mhm.
Or is it a phenomenon which is coming up in non-urban settlements too?
Okay, the second question is more complicated. Let me just answer that before I forget. First of all, many migrant workers in China are temporary migrants. They don't establish their households in cities permanently because government hukou, household registration, forbids them from permanent migration. Those who have jobs, those with high education can migrate with government permission. So government is very involved where you can settle permanently through hukou system. So many migrants, especially low-end migrants, labor migrants, do not get family permission to settle down in urban cities, and they usually they when they are married, usually they are not living with their children. Their children are left behind with their grandparents, and husband and wife very often will live in different group quarters, either in the same city or different cities. So many of them don't have normal family life you can consider. But if they move to cities permanently, they are likely to have nuclear families in cities. So nuclear family is more prevalent in cities than in countryside. But in countryside, it's also there is a socioeconomic differences. Those with more economic resources in more developed areas more likely to have independent living nuclear families. So multi-generational co-residence is in less developed areas and for poor families. So those who migrate, when they go back, they are likely to have more money and they're more likely to live independently. They're also affected by their city experiences in terms of ideation. So their behaviors will reflect behaviors in cities. So when they go back, they have experienced something different, and it's likely to be lifestyles in cities. And they also more likely to experience cohabitation because they're away from their family of origin. They don't have constraints, village constraints. So they're more likely to be kind of untraditional in their family behaviors. So the first question, what are forms of contraception? Abortion is legal and is practiced, but it's used as a last result, not as a preferred method of contraception. So I think it's probably it's costly emotionally and also in other ways. So abortion is like any society, even though it's legal, it's used as a last result, not as a preferred form of contraception. I'm not an expert in the area, actually. I think the most common forms of contraception are two. I think are two. One is a condom. The other is and condom is also promoted against sexually transmitted disease. It's a concern because among the young, you could have, as I said, government is no longer in the business of controlling individuals' lives. So young people could have multiple partners. So there is a public health concern, and the government has promoted the use of condoms as a prevention of spread of AIDS and other sexually transmitted disease. The second is the pill is widely used on the female side. Women's birth control pill is widely used. They also have morning after pills over the counter. So for unanticipated, unprotected sex, I think another is not regularly used because it's expensive. Morning after pill is also available. So again, different people use different methods. There's an individualized behavior.
Okay, well, I think it's about time that we wrapped up now. I think there are a couple of loose ends from my side and from the chat box. One is that I think you rather skirted the question of male-female sex ratios at birth and later. So that when you were explaining, for instance, why a lot of men at the bottom of the pile didn't get married, that may be because they're at the bottom of a pile and their chances are not so good. And it would also affect the respective ages of marriage of men and women in a population. That was one thought which we would, I think, from an Indian perspective, like to talk about. And one solution to, of course, being at the bottom of the pile and not able to marry might be to import brides from poorer places, including other countries. So it's the source, perhaps, of the traffic in brides, which goes parallel to the traffic in nannies and maids and so on. That was one sort of observation. The other thing is, in conclusion, it just happened that this morning I went through a paper by a very well-known Chinese sociologist of the older generation, Xuan Qi, who was actually looking at some of these same questions, that is, interviewing young people, college students, but not entirely college students, on their attitudes and to cohabitation and premarital sex and so on. And at the end of it, the paper, the field work might have been done in about 2000, so a generation ago in a way. But at the end of it, she recorded that a lot of people thought some people confessed to petting and having some sexual experience before marriage and so on. But on the whole, she said that people didn't practice what they thought they might like to do. And especially party members or members of the Communist Party and Youth League and so on were quite puritanical in their habits, and many people were also worried about government political crackdowns on their private lives. So one can see that quite a, in this very respect, quite a lot has changed. The end of her paper, she made some policy recommendations that there should be more family or sex education and explanations, and the older generation should take an interest in explaining things to the younger ones, and so on. So it doesn't look like, I mean, the change from in one generation seems to be quite palpable. So this is your presentation was very interesting from this perspective also, that what she believed at the time was impossible. People were not really going to act out their thoughts, but had them nonetheless. That has actually happened. I think that we should conclude there with many thanks for a very, very lucid presentation, very educative also, and with a lot for us to think about here in India in terms of the changes going on here. So from all of us here, a nice refreshing change from our usual geopolitical discussions, and we'll hope that we'll see more of you. Thank you for Hemant also introducing you. So on behalf of ICS, thank you very much.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, everyone.